I used to think that if everything fell apart, I'd go home. That was always the mental safety net I'd carried, through college deadlines, through marriage fights, through the slow unraveling of my last job. But when the walls finally did come down, when I had no spouse, no paycheck, and barely enough dignity to fill a suitcase, I learned something that no self-help book ever prepared me for. Sometimes, home stops being home long before you stop needing it. I arrived at my parents' house in Columbus on a Tuesday morning. Early spring. The driveway was wet with leftover rain. I parked at the curb, not wanting to block the garage like I used to when I lived there. Like that would make it less intrusive, less desperate. The front yard looked just like I remembered. Trimmed hedges, the same faded flag my dad insisted on keeping up year-round, even after he stopped standing to salute it. I rang the bell out of courtesy, even though I still had my old key. My mother opened the door slowly, her expression more confused than surprised. "Vera, I wasn't expecting you," she said flatly, eyes darting over my shoulder to my packed car. I smiled or tried to. "I just need a few weeks. It's not permanent. I'm between things right now. Divorce finalized, job gone. I need to catch my breath." She stepped aside without saying anything else. That should have been the first sign. The living room hadn't changed. Same floral patterned couch, same dusty family portraits on the wall, none of which included me past age 24. I sat on the edge of the sofa like a guest. She offered tea, which felt oddly formal. I shook my head. "I'm not asking for anything big," I said, breaking the silence. "Just a roof for a while. I'll be applying for jobs immediately, maybe in the city." She sat across from me, folding her hands in her lap like she was negotiating a contract. Then she hit me with it. "This isn't a free shelter, Vera. We're not running a charity here." My heart didn't break. It recoiled. I blinked, wondering if I'd misheard. "I'm not asking to be coddled," I said quietly. "I just need time." She tilted her head like I was being deliberately naive. "You've always needed time. Time to grow up. Time to figure things out. We've done our share." That sentence, it landed harder than the divorce papers ever did. There was no shouting, no thrown plates, just a quiet, practiced cruelty that made it impossible to argue without looking hysterical. I left 15 minutes later. Back in the car, I dialed the only other number I had left, my brother's, or more specifically, his wife's, since she was the one who answered these days. "Vera?" Isolde sounded sweet, too sweet. "What's going on? Everything okay?" I explained, briefly, less than I had told my mother. She listened, made those humming sounds polite women make when they're calculating. "You're welcome to stay with us," she said eventually, her tone rehearsed. "But it'll need to be under some clear terms." "Here it comes," I thought. "I'm sure you understand," she continued. "We just renovated, and extra people, well, it shifts the household dynamic, so we'd ask for a small contribution, just to keep things fair." "How small?" I asked, though I already felt the weight forming in my chest. $3,000 a month, paid up front, for 12 months. I almost laughed. Almost. "You're asking me for $36,000, I said. "Well, rent in this neighborhood isn't cheap," she chirped, "and you'd have your own room." There was silence. Then she added, almost gleefully, "You'd be surprised how many family members take advantage. We just want to keep things clean." She was right about one thing. I was surprised, not at the condition, but at how well she masked it as generosity. I thanked her, hung up, and drove. No destination, no music, no tears. Just movement. By dusk, I was standing at the edge of a lot that used to be my home, not the one with the trimmed hedges and stained glass front door, but the little place I bought with my own money years ago, the one I'd lost after everything went sideways. It was mostly rubble now, blackened beams, ashes where my kitchen had been. They said it was an electrical fire, but I hadn't believed that even before the smoke cleared. I stood there staring at the ashes, realizing even ruins felt kinder than the people I called family. The motel room smelled like old cigarettes and bleach that had given up halfway through its job. The carpet was sticky in some corners, and the heater coughed more than it hummed. But for the first time in days, I had 4 walls that didn't come with conditions. I'd spent the previous night curled up in the back seat of my car, the kind of sleep that doesn't fix anything but lets you forget for a while. My back still ached from it, and the muscles in my neck protested with every movement. I carried my only bag in, locked the door, and dropped onto the stiff mattress like it owed me something. The springs beneath me made a sound like an old man clearing his throat. When people leave you out in the cold, sometimes even roaches under a motel bed feel like company. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I stared at the ceiling until my eyes stopped seeing it. By the second afternoon, I knew I had to move. Not homes or rooms. Those were luxuries I couldn't afford. I needed answers. So I drove downtown to check my P.O. box. There was a small stack of mail waiting, 2 credit card offers, 1 final notice from the bank, and a beige envelope with my mortgage insurance company's logo printed cleanly in the corner. I turned it over. The forwarding address listed beneath my name wasn't my current location. It wasn't even the last apartment I shared with my ex-husband. It was Isolde's home address. For a second, I thought it was a clerical error. A weird coincidence. I even chuckled once, a short breath of disbelief. But when I opened the letter and read the contents, review of payout eligibility following confirmed destruction, I knew this wasn't an accident. Someone had rerouted the paperwork. I took a photo of the envelope, then the document, and emailed it to Patrick, an old friend from law school I hadn't spoken to in over a year. The subject line was short. Please verify if this is legal. Underneath it, I wrote only one sentence. I think someone's trying to erase me. I sat in the parking lot for a long time after that, watching people come and go from the post office, walking in and out of their stable lives. Then I drove. The Isolde I remembered used to bake banana bread and bring it to Thanksgiving, dressed in cashmere and charm. She used to call me sweetheart in that overly affectionate way some women do when they're masking a jab. But I knew where she lived, and I wasn't about to shrink. Her neighborhood was the type with fresh mulch in the flower beds and 3-car garages, a world that had never included me, even when I tried to fit in. I parked a block away and walked the rest. When I knocked on the door, it wasn't my brother who answered. It was Leora, their daughter. She opened the door just wide enough to show her face and the hint of a trembling lip. "Hey, kiddo," I said gently. She looked over her shoulder, then whispered, "Mom said not to let you in. She said you're just trying to make trouble." I nodded once. No use in arguing with a teenager stuck between walls she didn't build. The door closed. Then it opened again, this time by Isolde herself. She stepped outside like she'd just come back from yoga. Tight leggings, a curated ponytail, and that trademark artificial calm. "Vera," she said with a smile that never reached her eyes, "I wish you'd called. I needed to ask about the insurance documents. They were sent to your address." She raised a brow like I'd accused her of kidnapping a puppy. "Was that a problem?" I didn't respond. "Well," she continued with a short laugh, "you know how things get shuffled around during emergencies. I figured it was easier to manage through us. You've been hard to reach lately." "I still exist," I said. "Of course you do," she replied, glancing at the neighbor's windows. "Let's not make this dramatic. I also wanted to ask about Leora, about all those times I helped, the pickups, the babysitting. I just wanted to understand how we got from there to here." She tilted her head like I'd spoken in another language. "Vera, let's not pretend you did us any favors. You volunteered, remember? You were between jobs then, too." It wasn't just what she said, it was how casually she dismissed 6 months of my life. I remembered every early morning drop-off, every weekend night I stayed in so she could go out, every time Leora fell asleep on my lap watching cartoons because her parents weren't home. And now it was being rewritten like a footnote. Irrelevant, unwanted, unpaid. I didn't argue. I just nodded, turned, and left. When people rewrite history, it's never with ink. It's with tone, timing, and an audience. Back in my car, I pulled out my phone and saw a reply from Patrick. It was short. "You need to sit down." This wasn't a mailing error. I didn't sit down. I drove straight to the only place that had answers, the ruins of what used to be mine. The sun was barely up when I pulled into the gravel shoulder across from what used to be my house. 3 days ago, I stood there as a woman rejected by blood. Now I stood as someone whose history had literally gone up in smoke. It wasn't sentiment pulling me back here. It was suspicion, and something colder than grief. I stepped through a gap in the yellow caution tape. The ground crunched under my boots, ash layered over wet soil. Blackened beams curled like broken ribs, and pieces of my former life jutted from the wreckage. A melted light fixture dangled from what remained of the front porch, swaying lightly with the morning breeze. This wasn't a grave. Graves are for resting. This was a crime scene, and I didn't come to mourn. I came to dig. The garage, or what was left of it, had collapsed inward, but one corner still stood where I remembered tucking away an old file cabinet. It was a rusted metal thing I had dragged from my first job and refused to throw away. I crouched down, cleared debris away with my sleeves, and found the corner edge, charred but intact. The top drawer was sealed shut by heat. I pried it open using a crowbar I'd borrowed from a neighbor. Inside, paper had fused to metal, except one bundle, shielded at an angle, only partially burned. I pulled it free. The edges flaked like old bread, but the center, still legible. I stared at it. The title at the top read, Warranty Deed. My hands trembled, not from nerves but from rage cooling into realization. Where my name should have been typed, I saw hers, Seraphine Blackwood, my mother. I couldn't breathe for a second. The noise of traffic in the distance disappeared. The moment stretched like the silence after a gut punch. I turned page after page. No mention of my name. No signature. Just hers. They didn't just sell me out. They erased me. Back at the motel, I laid the document flat on the bed. The smell of ash still clung to it, and to me, I didn't bother changing clothes. I just sat there, staring at the proof that everything I had worked for had been repackaged under someone else's name, and it had probably happened long before the fire. They planned this. That thought was no longer speculative. It was truth dressed in legal print. Later that evening, while microwaving a frozen burrito, I heard a knock at the door. The front desk never let anyone up, so it had to be mail slipped under the crack. Old school, no return address. I picked up the envelope and recognized the handwriting immediately. Carly Mitchell. We hadn't talked in 5 years. She was my co-signer when I bought the house. An accountant with a memory like a vault. Inside was a photocopy of the original deed. The one I remembered. The one with my name listed solely as owner. Attached was a sticky note with her signature red ink. I kept this in my tax files in case you ever needed it. Something about the way your mom looked at you during closing never sat right with me. I sat down slowly. A part of me wanted to cry, but I didn't. This wasn't pain. This was validation. I pulled out a plastic sleeve and slid the document inside. Labeled it with a marker. Original. Proof. Tucked it into my only remaining file folder. I sat there with the motel light flickering overhead and realized something. They didn't destroy me when they burned my house. They just exposed what they'd been building in the dark. I had the ash. I had the scars. But now I also had proof. And that changed everything. I knew where the paper trail ended. Now I needed to find who lit the match. I didn't sleep that night. I laid there, still dressed, staring at the cracks in the motel ceiling like they might rearrange themselves into something resembling logic. The deed, my real deed, was tucked under my pillow. I didn't trust the motel's safe, or the front desk, or anything outside the 4 dim walls I was paying $48 a night for. The storm outside hadn't let up since dusk. Rain tapped rhythmically against the glass, and the light from the street lamp outside flickered like it couldn't make up its mind. Silence doesn't soothe when your past is rewriting itself. By morning, my hands were still trembling. Not from fear, something else, a knowing that had nowhere to go. I needed to see how deep it all ran. The public library downtown opened at 9. I got there at 8:40, paced the sidewalk for 20 minutes, then slid inside the moment the security guard flipped the sign. I sat down at a computer near the back, logged into my old email, an account I hadn't touched since before the house, before the job fell apart, before Seraphine started talking to me like I was some tenant late on rent. There it was, a thread dated 6 months back, archived under a project folder I'd forgotten to clean out. Subject line, Next Steps, Glenmore Transfer. It was between Isolde and Seraphine. Nothing official, just two women plotting like their version of reasonable would hold up in court. If Vera can't maintain it, Isolde had written, it's smarter to move the title. You know how these things can spiral. She'll thank you later. My pulse quickened. Then I read the line that stopped me cold. She doesn't know what's coming. I reread it 5 times, as if the phrasing might shift under scrutiny. It didn't. It just sat there, casual and cruel, like they weren't just stealing, they were enjoying it. I printed the whole thread, all 8 pages, then sat in my car gripping them so tightly the edges curled. No one had my back, so I'd have to fight like I didn't need one. That afternoon, I drove to my parents' house. The porch still had the same wind chimes I'd made in middle school. Seraphine answered the door in slacks and a beige cardigan, hair pinned like she was auditioning for a PTA board. I need to talk, I said, holding the printouts in one hand and the manila folder in the other. I'm heading out, she replied without warmth. Can it wait? It already did, I said, brushing past her and stepping inside. I laid the documents on the dining room table, right where she used to lay out bills for me to sort when I was 19 and clueless. She glanced at them, then at me. What's this supposed to prove? You tell me, I replied. Her eyes narrowed. Emails can be misleading. Taken out of context. Then explain the context of she doesn't know what's coming. She didn't flinch, but she didn't answer either. I pointed to the second folder, slowly pulling out a bank statement. You remember the roof leak? Last March? Vaguely. I wired you 12 grand. Seraphine shrugged, too casually. Did we sign a contract? You called it a gift at the time. No, I didn't, I said, my voice even. And even if I did, gifts aren't excuses for betrayal. She crossed her arms. I don't recall asking for that money. I slid the paper across the table. The memo line read, in my own words, roof repair. Love you, Mom. For the first time, her face cracked. Not regret, irritation, like I was an inconvenience she thought she'd already disposed of. I left without another word. Back in the motel, the rain had stopped, but the air still felt like it might break into thunder any minute. I sat on the bed, phone in hand, and hit record. They've turned debt into leverage, I whispered into the mic. I'm turning truth into a weapon. Then I closed the folder, zipped it inside my tote, and slid my feet into boots I hadn't worn in a year. There was one more person I needed to see, someone who fought these kinds of fires before they turned to smoke. I looked up his address, made an appointment, and headed out. Some betrayals scream through fights, others whisper through paperwork and fake smiles, and those cut the deepest. The motel alarm went off before sunrise, but I'd already been awake. Sleep had become a formality, something I pretended to chase but never actually caught. I reached for my phone, swiped through the notifications, and stopped cold at the red Facebook icon blinking in the corner of my screen. Some people will take and still call you the villain. Family is about boundaries, not sheltering entitlement. The post was from Seraphine, public, with her full friend list enabled. Hundreds of likes, dozens of comments, all predictable. You're so strong, Seraphine. People don't appreciate what they have until it's gone. You deserve peace. I scrolled, heart steady, hands not. One reply from a distant cousin I barely remembered. You've always been the backbone, Seraphine. Don't let anyone guilt you. I took screenshots, every word, every cheerleader. I wasn't going to respond with a paragraph or a quote about healing, no vague subtweets. I wasn't fighting this in status updates. I would fight it in paper, in print, in documentation they couldn't manipulate with likes and emojis. I spent the next hour at the small motel desk, spreading out every document I had, the original deed, the forged transfer, the wire confirmation from my bank, printouts of emails. Then I made a timeline, every date, every dollar, every instance where trust was turned into currency. After organizing the pages, I emailed it all to Rachel, a community housing advocate I'd once worked with during a charity event. I wasn't sure if she'd remember me, but I signed the message with, "This isn't about charity. This is about theft. If you can help, I'll owe you nothing but the truth." She replied within the hour, "Come in Monday. Bring everything." And Vera, "You're doing the right thing." It was the first thing I'd heard in days that didn't feel like a slap. By mid-afternoon, I drove back to the remains of my old house. I didn't come for nostalgia. I didn't come for closure. I came with purpose, and someone who knew how to see what others missed. Ryan Torres had worked as a fire inspector for 23 years. We met during a city housing inspection years ago. He owed me a favor. I cashed it in. "You're lucky the structure hasn't been cleared yet," he said, stepping carefully over collapsed drywall and charred studs. "Or maybe someone's luck is about to run out," I murmured. He crouched near the remains of the laundry area. I watched as he pulled a small flashlight from his belt, shining it across the floor. Then he crouched lower. "There's something here," he muttered. "What is it?" He pointed to a faint, slick-looking trail along the cracked tile. "Accelerant. Not gas, but something similar. Probably a cleaning agent with flammable properties." I didn't speak. He stood slowly and turned to me. "This wasn't just an overloaded circuit. Someone gave the fire a head start." I nodded once. "I figured." He stared. "You want this in a report?" "I want this in triplicate," I replied. Back at the motel, I stood at the copy machine they kept in the office for guests. The manager, a quiet man with nicotine fingers and earbuds in one ear, didn't ask questions as I fed page after page into the scanner. Police reports, photos, emails, Ryan's analysis. I labeled the folders: original ownership, evidence of transfer, proof of funds, and intentional damage. I uploaded everything to 2 flash drives, 1 cloud storage folder, and my attorney's email. Then I sat down on the edge of the bed, glanced around the tiny room, and whispered the sentence I'd waited too long to say. "They gave me the fire. I'll give them the fallout." The only thing louder than their lies would be my paper trail, and I was just getting started. The fluorescent lights inside the county archive room buzzed with a fatigue I recognized. Too much history, too little care. I stood at the service window, tapping my ID nervously on the counter as the clerk disappeared into the back. My voice had barely been above a whisper when I'd asked for the records. Property history for 1847 Glenmore Avenue. It had felt surreal, saying the address aloud, like calling out to a ghost. The clerk returned with a manila folder so thick the brass fasteners were bowed. He slid it toward me without eye contact and motioned me to the public review desk. I didn't sit right away. I opened the folder slowly, flipping past deed updates, tax notices, and zoning permits. Halfway through, something stopped me. A document stamped with a local small business registration number. Title: Wellnest Living Consultancy. Owner: Isolde Fitch. Registered 3 months before the fire. She hadn't just stolen my home, she'd used it. Filed a business at my address like it was hers to build from. My signature was nowhere in the form, just hers, clean, legal-looking. "This is beyond betrayal," I muttered, voice shaking as I took out my phone and snapped photos. "This is enterprise-level erasure." I emailed the file to both my attorney and Rachel, the housing advocate. The subject line read, "New development. We need to talk." Outside the courthouse, the sun had risen fully, too bright for how I felt. I leaned against my car, the file folder pressed to my chest. The rage was still there, but sharper now, refined. That afternoon, I stopped by the storage unit I'd rented after the fire. I'd barely opened the boxes since I stacked them there, too raw, too loaded. But now, I had a reason. The one I needed was marked in faded Sharpie. Dad's books. I pulled it to the front, opened the flaps, and began sifting through volumes he'd given me when I was just starting out in housing law. Legal guides, old case files, yellowed notepads filled with his scribbles. At the bottom was a slim, leather-bound book, Ohio Property Law, annotated. I flipped through it out of habit, expecting nothing more than margin notes and old highlights. Instead, a folded piece of paper slid out. The paper was stiff, creased from years of hiding. It was written in his handwriting, unmistakable, looping, careful. It was a will. Not notarized, not formal, but clear. The home at 1847 Glenmore Avenue belongs solely to my daughter, Vera Blackwood. It is not to be transferred without her knowledge or consent. Signed, Astria Blackwood. My hands began to shake, not from grief, but from knowing that someone had once tried to protect me, and failed. Not from lack of love, but from the quiet, habitual deferral that had defined my father all his life. He wanted to do right. He just didn't want to do it out loud. I scanned the will with my phone, then again on my portable printer for a cleaner version. I backed it up 3 times and placed it in the same sleeve as the business registration. Layer upon layer of their lies now had to face something stronger, truth. As evening rolled in, I returned once more to the ruins. I stood at the edge of the foundation, the wind kicking up dust and memory. In my hands, I held the copied will. This wasn't evidence, it was inheritance, not of property, but of intent. A man who couldn't fight for me in life had left behind something that could help me fight now. They built a fire to erase the paper, I whispered. He left 1 page they couldn't burn. As I turned to leave, my phone rang. Patrick's name lit up the screen. There's something else you need to see, he said. But I can't email it. You need to come in. I walked out of the ruins holding one piece of truth. I was about to learn there was more, and worse. Patrick's office had always been too quiet. The kind of quiet that made you realize how loud your thoughts could get when there wasn't enough noise to drown them out. The blinds were half drawn, casting a diagonal stripe of light across the floor like a half-hearted interrogation spotlight. I sat across from him, fingers knotted tightly, heart on a hair trigger. He didn't look up when I walked in, just reached for a small speaker on his desk, pressed play, and leaned back with a face that told me nothing and everything. Then I heard her voice, Leora, whispering, almost trembling, but clear enough to slice through the air between us. They're planning to push her out for good. Mom said once the house is gone, she won't have any legal ground left. My jaw clenched. She kept speaking. She said if Vera doesn't fight back fast, they'll have everything buttoned up before she even knows what happened. Grandma already moved the insurance info. I heard them on the phone last week. Hey, they don't think she has it in her. Silence followed. I looked up at Patrick. Can that be used? My voice came out steadier than I expected. He nodded slowly. Not only can it be used, it's gold. Time-stamped, voiced, no coaching, pure intent. I stared at the speaker like it was a grenade someone had rolled gently into the room. Then I leaned back and exhaled through my teeth. I didn't have to make anyone say it. They said it themselves. Patrick stood, walked over to his cabinet, and pulled out a flash drive in a tiny Ziploc bag. There's more, he said. This came in anonymously, security footage from a neighbor who works night shift at the gas station off Briar Road. He plugged it in, and a grainy video file opened. Nighttime. Quiet. Then a figure appeared. Female. Hooded. Confident gait. She walked straight to pump 6, pulled a red gas can from her trunk, and began filling it. No hesitation. Patrick hit pause. The timestamp read, 1:37 a.m. The day before the fire, my breath caught. She poured gasoline into a can with the same calm she uses pouring tea at brunch, I muttered. He didn't disagree. Isolde paid with a debit card, he added. The receipt matches the time and the station log. It's connected to her business account. A soft, bitter laugh escaped me. The one she registered under my address. Patrick nodded. We now have motive, he said. Financial, proof of access, and with Leora's message, we've got intent. He laid out the trifecta like a closing argument. Want to proceed? I reached for the file folder I had prepared days earlier, pulled out the fire inspector's report, the deed reversal, the insurance timeline, and placed them beside the new evidence. I didn't need time to think. I want to reopen the case as arson. I want a full investigation. Then we'll file today. As he began organizing the papers, I walked over to the copier and fed in the USB, stills from the gas station video. Transcript of Leora's message. A cover page reading. Submitted by Vera Blackwood. Statement of alleged intent and malice. They thought I would burn quietly. They lit the fire. She handed me the matchbook. And now? Now I was handing it to the court. They played God with my life. Now the court would hear how divine judgment really works. The morning after the evidence drop, I opened my laptop and stared at the blinking cursor longer than I should have. My coffee had gone cold. The motel microwave beeped behind me, a reminder I had forgotten about breakfast again. But my mind was elsewhere, on the one thing I had left that they couldn't control. My voice. I titled the document, When Family Becomes Firewood. Then I wrote, and I didn't hold back. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. I described what it meant to watch your childhood home burn down, not from negligence, but from calculation. I spoke about how boundaries had become a weapon of choice, wielded by those who couldn't admit to betrayal. I quoted Seraphine's post, word for word. Then I wrote, I was told this wasn't a free shelter, and then they made sure I had no shelter at all. By noon, the letter was sent to the Columbus Sentinel, and by dinner, it was live. I watched it spread, quietly at first, then exponentially. It was shared by people I didn't know, commented on by strangers who wrote things like, "This sounds familiar," or "Blood isn't thicker when it's used as fuel." By the time I walked into the Community Mediation Center 2 days later, I was no longer just someone with a grudge. I was a name, a narrative they couldn't rewrite this time. The meeting room was bland and beige, chairs in a circle, coffee in a stainless steel pump pot, and a stack of pamphlets no one touched. I recognized the mediator from a housing workshop I'd once attended. He smiled at me, then motioned to a seat near the window. I hadn't been sitting for more than 3 minutes when the door opened again. Seraphine entered first, her mouth set in a thin line. Isolde followed, immaculate as always, in a dark blazer and heels too sharp for someone pretending to be the reasonable party. "Thank you both for coming," the mediator began, shuffling papers. "We're not here to determine guilt or innocence. Just to talk through what's been made public," Seraphine cut in before he finished. "That letter was defamatory. We've had people calling our house. Leora's school asked for a parent meeting." I remained still. "You've gone too far," she continued. "We took you in." "You didn't," I said calmly. "You told me this wasn't a free shelter, and then you helped burn the only one I had." Seraphine's eyes widened, not from shock, but from the realization that the old Vera wasn't sitting across from her anymore. Isolde leaned forward, lips tight. "You've taken something private and dragged it into the street." I reached down into my bag and pulled out a file labeled in thick Sharpie. Receipts. I placed it on the table and opened it slowly, revealing still frames from the gas station footage, a printed transcript of Leora's message, the deed, and Ryan's report on the accelerant. Isolde blinked. Once. "I didn't come here to burn bridges," I said, voice low. "I came to expose who lit the fire." They didn't speak again. 2 hours later, I stood beside Patrick at a press briefing outside his office. Reporters had already gotten wind of the civil suit, insurance fraud, arson, willful displacement. He went through the key points: the business registered under my stolen address, the gas station video, the voice memo from their own blood, all laid bare. I didn't speak until the very end, when a reporter asked why I waited this long. "Because I thought family meant something," I said. "Turns out it does. It means knowing exactly who can hurt you, and how easily they will, if they think they won't be caught." That evening, I watched Seraphine's Facebook profile change from public to private. Her posts had no more likes from extended family. Isolde's business website was taken down for maintenance. I didn't feel victorious, not yet, but I felt heard. Walking out of the community center, I didn't flinch at the camera flashes. And I didn't rush. I let the clicks follow me down the steps like punctuation. Silence used to be their shield. Now, it's my sword. They weren't just unraveling, they were unraveling in public, and I had more thread to pull. The knock at the motel door was light, almost hesitant, like the person behind it wasn't fully convinced they should be there. I looked through the peephole and blinked. "Mrs. Dalloway." She was hunched slightly, clutching a notepad in one hand and a grocery bag in the other. I hadn't seen her since the fire. She used to live 2 doors down from me, always watering her roses at sunset, always watching more than she let on. I opened the door. She smiled nervously. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said. "But I need to tell you something." I stepped aside and let her in. She took a seat at the table without being asked, placing her bag on the floor and the notepad in her lap. Her hands trembled. "I should have come sooner," she said. "But I didn't want to get dragged into anything. I'm too old for courtrooms and conflict." I waited. She looked me in the eyes. "I saw her, the night before your house burned. I felt the air in the room shift. She was outside your garage, pacing, on her phone. I couldn't hear much, but she kept repeating something. 'I'll handle it myself,' or 'I'll take care of it myself.' Angry, sharp, not her usual tone. I said nothing, just reached for a notepad and wrote everything down. She was holding something in her hand, Mrs. Dalloway added. Couldn't tell what it was. Then she left in that red SUV. I didn't think it was important until, well, her eyes welled up. I didn't want to believe what people were saying, but when I saw your story in the paper, I couldn't sleep. I figured I owed you the truth. I put a hand over hers gently. You're doing the right thing. Thank you. I can talk to your lawyer, she said. If he needs a statement. He will. 2 hours later, Patrick called. I just got something else, he said. You'll want to see it in person. The next morning, I sat across from him as he played the doorbell camera footage. It had been recovered by a tech-savvy neighbor, someone who said they thought the system had glitched during the night of the fire. It hadn't. The footage had just been buried under overwritten files, and there she was, a figure in a hoodie. The frame was dark, but clear enough to make out her posture, her stride, the way she looked around before crouching near the garage. She poured something from a small container, then stood and left. Patrick hit pause. That's the smoking gun, he said, barely above a whisper. He didn't have to say her name. We both knew. Isolde. Later that day, at the courthouse, everything buzzed with the tension of a thunderstorm just waiting to break. The hallway was packed with attorneys, clerks, people whispering into phones or shuffling paperwork like it could save their souls. And then I saw them, Seraphine and Isolde, walking toward me like they still thought they controlled the outcome. Isolde smiled like she was greeting a cashier. All this, she said, voice dripping with sarcasm, just because you couldn't let go of one old house? I kept my voice calm, my eyes steady. No, because you couldn't stop lying. The bailiff motioned us to opposite ends of the hallway, and that was it. No more words, no more games. For the first time, they weren't in control of the room, the story, or me. They used to tell me I was overreacting. Now, they call it a legal investigation, and it's just getting started. The courthouse was colder than I remembered, both in temperature and in energy. The kind of chill that sinks into your bones, not from weather, but from knowing that justice, if it comes at all, will take its time. Patrick's call had come early. Lyora's agreed, he said. I didn't need to ask what that meant. My niece, the quiet shadow in a house of glass, was ready to speak. We met at Schiller Park that afternoon, the same spot where I used to take her when Isolde needed a mental reset or Seraphine had a prayer group conflict. Lyora was already seated on the bench when I arrived, fingers plucking at a thread on her sleeve. She looked up when I sat down but didn't smile, just said, I'm sorry it took me this long. I'm just glad you're here, I replied. I thought if I stayed quiet it wouldn't get worse, she said softly. But it already was. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small notebook, every page filled. She had dates, snippets of conversations, exact phrasing. She'd been listening long before she knew how much it mattered. Mom said, once the house burns, she'll have no way back. Grandma said she was just being practical. They kept saying you couldn't handle it anymore. But it never sounded like worry. It sounded like satisfaction. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I hugged her, and she hugged me back. "This won't be easy," I said. "They're going to twist everything." "I know," she whispered, "but this time, I'm not the quiet one." The next day, Patrick handed me another envelope. This came from the hospital. They were cleaning out Astria's room, found it tucked inside an old paperback. Inside was a folded piece of yellow-lined paper, my father's handwriting, a log. Each entry detailed an amount, a date, a note. $400, school supplies for Vera. $6,000, roof repair, from Vera. Don't tell Seraphine, she'll spend it elsewhere. $2,300, emergency dental, Vera, paid back. It was more than money. It was record-keeping out of guilt, or fear, or love he didn't know how to say aloud. He tried, I murmured. He really tried, just never loud enough. Patrick placed the log next to the folder marked Exhibits. The judge had allowed everything. Leora's deposition, the surveillance footage, the gas station receipt, and now this. The pre-trial hearing was held in a small chamber. Wooden panels, a single flag in the corner, a judge with reading glasses who didn't look up often but didn't miss a thing. Isolde and Seraphine sat at the far end, stone-faced. Seraphine wore the same brooch she used to pin on before Sunday service. Isolde had her arms crossed like she'd walked into a meeting that bored her. Leora took the stand with trembling hands and steel in her spine. She told the truth. The room didn't shift. It froze. Every word chipped away at the foundation Seraphine had built, one story at a time. Every timeline Leora outlined matched our documentation. Every phrase she recalled mirrored the email threads. Her voice, once so quiet, now echoed in a room where it could no longer be dismissed. After she stepped down, the judge called a recess. As we exited, cameras flared from the sidewalk. Leora reached for my hand. I didn't flinch. We walked together down the steps, the courthouse looming behind us, not as a threat, but as proof that the walls had started to crack. I didn't need them to admit guilt. I just needed the truth heard. And now, it was echoing. The courthouse steps didn't feel like a battleground that morning. No press, no crowds, no cameras chasing every expression, just me, my coffee cooling in hand, and a manila folder tucked tightly under my arm. I wore a black coat that didn't ask for attention. No makeup, no jewelry, just clarity. This wasn't the finale. It was the final answer to a question they'd tried to bury. How far would you go to silence the one thing you couldn't control? Me? Inside the courtroom, things moved quietly. Patrick spoke with calm precision, laying out our final set of exhibits. I sat next to him, eyes forward, letting the silence hold. Across the aisle, Seraphine whispered to Isolde. From the way her shoulder leaned in and her fingers gripped her clutch, I knew she was nervous, even if her face didn't crack. Isolde remained still, legs crossed tightly, eyes sharp but unreadable. Then I looked up and caught Seraphine's gaze. For a long second we stared. No words passed between us. Not apologies, not accusations, just the weight of 38 years of expectations, manipulations, and the unspoken rule that silence was the only acceptable daughterly virtue. When court paused for a short recess, I stepped into the hallway with my folder in hand. I spotted her near the restroom, alone, scrolling her phone. I approached, not quickly, deliberately. She sensed me before I spoke. I stopped beside her, just close enough for her to feel my presence. I waited, for a glance, a word, even a muttered insult, something to acknowledge that I was still her daughter, even if she hated what I'd become. But she didn't. She turned her head away, arms crossed, lips drawn tight like a sealed envelope that would never be opened. That moment, it was the last time I ever looked for anything from her. I didn't speak. I didn't let the silence drag me down. I walked past her, each step lighter than the last. By the time the hearing resumed, I had let go of needing anything from that woman who once tucked me in with one hand and cut me down with the other. Later, as the hearing adjourned for the day, I stepped out into the plaza and spotted her before she saw me, Leora, waiting on the steps, arms wrapped around herself, not in fear but in steadiness. When she saw me, she walked straight up and wrapped her arms around me in front of everyone. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't staged, no cameras clicked, no one gave a statement. But for the first time, I felt the shift. I had lost a mother, but I didn't leave empty-handed. They burned the bridge, and I watched the smoke. But I was already walking a different way. The courtroom didn't erupt when the verdict was read. There were no gasps, no banging gavels, no dramatic outbursts. Just the steady voice of the judge delivering what had already become inevitable. Restitution for insurance fraud. The property, my house, restored to my name. A restraining order issued against Seraphine and Isolde for coordinated harassment and intent to defraud. Silence. That was the real punctuation. And then, finally, Seraphine cried. She didn't sob, no broken gasps or visible shaking, just slow tears sliding down the face of a woman who had spent years perfecting control. But I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel pity. I felt confirmation. She wept, but not for me. She wept because the mask had slipped, and the world had seen what lived behind it. After court, I didn't go to lunch with Patrick. I didn't take calls. I drove straight to the lot where my house once stood. The fence around the site had been reinforced, but the lock was flimsy. I slipped through, my boots crunching over broken stone and scattered char. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the blackened earth. I crouched near what used to be the fireplace, the heart of the home. Beneath a panel of scorched concrete, I unearthed a small fire-safe box, nearly welded shut by heat. I'd hidden it there years ago, not for security, but sentiment. Inside had been letters, receipts, backup keys. One of those keys remained, blackened but intact. I held it in my hand, metal against palm, still warm from memory, if not fire. They thought fire would erase me, I whispered. It became the proof I lived. I stood over the ashes, opened my hand, and let the key fall. It landed without a sound. I didn't need to reclaim this land. I had already claimed my story. In the weeks that followed, I didn't move back in. There was no home to return to, only lessons not worth forgetting. With the restitution money, I rented a modest apartment on the edge of the city, small kitchen, quiet neighbors, a front door that locked with a satisfying click. I used the rest to build something else, a consultancy, online, grassroots, focused on helping women navigate toxic family financial abuse. I didn't advertise with my name. I didn't need the spotlight. One podcast asked to interview me. I agreed, anonymously. When they asked what I'd say to someone going through what I didn't hesitate. You don't owe your life to the ones who tried to burn it down. The episode went viral, not because of drama, but because of how many people recognized themselves in that single sentence. Then, one morning, a letter arrived. It was from Leora. She'd moved out, enrolled at a college upstate. Her words were neat, but raw. You didn't just survive. You showed me how not to be afraid to leave. I folded the letter and placed it inside a drawer next to a new set of keys, my own, to a place chosen by me, for me, in my name alone. I stared at them for a long time, then, slowly, smiled. They tried to erase me, but the fire didn't kill me. It forged me. And just like that, the girl they tried to erase became the story no one could stop repeating.